I have read a ton of new releases this year. We're in the last few months now of 2023, and I thought there is no way that I am going to be surprised. There is no way that I'm gonna find a new release that surpasses any of the new releases I've already read this year. That being said, I think it is now time to reveal my favorite horror new release of 2023. That book is The September House by Carissa Orlando. It is very rare that I meet a haunted house story that I do not fall in love with. This book was no exception, and it has now garnered a well-deserved place on my Holy Grail favorites shelf. From the very start of this book, I immediately was so charmed by it. The September House takes the classic haunted house story and it puts its own spin on it. In The September House, we are following our main character, Margaret. Finding out that she and her husband have now moved into a haunted house, Margaret does not react in the way that you might expect someone to. She takes the haunting in stride. She makes friends with the ghosts in her house. Something I deeply loved and appreciated about this book was how different it was, how it takes that trope that I love, haunted house stories, and comes at it with such a different perspective. I felt like this story was very surreal, very self-aware, where instead of watching our characters trying to fight the house or solve the mystery, they accept it. They accept the haunting as a part of their life. The characters in this book are extremely vivid and they pop off the page, especially some of the ghost characters. I found myself getting so attached to these characters, especially if you've read this book. There is a character, one of the ghosts, named Frederica. The way that Frederica is described is very gruesome, very macabre. She was so sweet. She was so pure and wholesome. The way that she was always there for Margaret just warmed my heart. And I was reading this book picturing myself as Margaret, with this very gruesome figure walking around your house, doing these super sweet things for you. And I loved how Margaret would treat the ghost like totally normal, like nothing was weird about them, despite their very macabre appearance. I feel as though this book is almost a parody of the classic haunted house story, but at the same time, it is eerie, it is creepy, and there are genuinely scary scenes. This book actually gave me very strong vibes of another favorite book of mine, and that is Mary by Nat Cassidy. I felt like if Mary and Margaret were to meet, I really feel like they would have been friends. These two characters just constantly reminded me of one another. Similar as well to Mary is in The September House, it is dark, it is scary, but there were also moments where the writing was very humorous, very laugh out loud funny. Something I feel like this book was so successful at, and I would love for other authors to really take notes from Carissa Orlando and something that she did in this book. Other than the fact that it made me laugh, it made me cry, it scared me, and it genuinely engaged me. Carissa Orlando was so successful at doing something in this book that is a cardinal rule of writing and storytelling. While we are following our main character, Margaret, we also see her interactions with her husband, Hal. Something I truly admired about this author's writing was the way that she slowly dropped us little hints about Hal and Margaret's relationship. When the book picks up, you think, okay, this is just a typical older couple, nothing weird, nothing new, I've seen this before. But as the book progresses, you start noticing little red flags that make you very suspicious of what kind of relationship they had. This author was so successful at slowly and subtly building suspicion into the narrative. And this book is the perfect example of an author doing the cardinal rule of show, don't tell correctly. There were so many powerful themes in this book. The idea of finding that breaking point that we all have, where you say, I am no longer going to put up with this, and you find your strength and you stand up for yourself, or you stand up for someone else. I absolutely loved that theme at the heart of this book. I called this the best horror new release of 2023. A lot of that is because I connected very deeply with the characters. I talk a lot on my channel about how I personally feel as though I am more of a plot-driven reader. A lot of focus on character tends to bore me or not interest me. And now I'm convinced that I only think that because most authors don't do it right or don't do it well. Because this book is essentially a character-driven story. There's also an aspect of a mother-daughter relationship in this book where we follow Margaret's daughter, Catherine. So much about Margaret and Catherine's dynamic was extremely relatable to me. It was almost comforting to me reading about this character relationship, and I think that's probably part of the reason why I connected with this book so deeply, was because I could relate to Catherine's character a lot and some of the things that she had went through in her life. And to see by the end of the book the way that the characters overcome these obstacles, it just truly touched my heart. It was so special to me reading this book. It made me incredibly emotional. I would also strongly recommend to you the audiobook if you are interested in reading The September House. This audio narrator really brought the story to life. You guys know how critical I am of books on my channel. And I'm gonna use a word here that I don't know if I've ever used to describe a book on my channel before. To me, this book was perfect. It hit on all of the points that I want to see in a book. It made me laugh, it made me cry, I connected to the characters, I was never bored, I was fully engaged. I loved this book. It was everything I wanted from a horror novel, from a story, from a book. This gave it to me. And I am really scared to try to pick a favorite book of the year because I don't know how I'm going to be able to choose between The September House and a handful of other amazing books I've read this year, namely Mary by Nat Cassidy, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, Bunny by Mona Awad. How am I going to pick a favorite book? These books are all phenomenal, 5 out of 5 star masterpiece horror novels, and I don't know how to pick one, but we will get into favorites of the year in a couple weeks. So let's move on from The September House for now. You will hear me talk about this book again in the future. Needless to say, I did rate The September House 5 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend it. There are a few trigger warnings in this book that I would recommend looking into before you go into this one. And I do want to say, if you guys ever want to know trigger warnings on any of the books that I talked about, you can always leave me a comment down below and just let me know that you want to know the trigger warnings and what book you want to know it, and I will let you know. However, I just checked and I have been filming my review of The September House for a full 48 minutes. So we're gonna move on to the next book. The next best book of the month that I read in October was Doll Bones by Holly Black. This is a middle grade mystery horror novel in which we follow 3 best friends who come to acquire a haunted doll. This doll is haunted by a ghost who tells the friends that they need to return this doll back to the place where the ghost was originally alive. So we watch the best friends go on a journey with this doll to pretty much set this ghost free. I really enjoyed reading this book. There is something about middle grade fiction, especially like horror middle grade, spooky middle grade fiction, that is just hitting different than anything else. Something I especially love reading about in middle grade fiction is when the main characters have to go on some sort of adventure, when they have to travel somewhere. There's something so exciting about imagining yourself back in the place of being like 12 years old and going on this crazy adventure with your friends where you take a bus, leave home, get on a boat, and you have this mission or quest that you have to carry out. I just found that aspect so much fun, so thrilling. I also thought that this book was very dark, way darker than I would expect from a middle grade book. So I would say that this is a middle grade book that has very good crossover for an adult audience. It doesn't read too young like some middle grade fiction can. I rated this book a full 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The majority of these books I read for the readathon that I spoke about in the beginning of this video that I co-hosted with Maddie Moon's Library. So some of these books are a little bit weird for me. They're a little bit of off-the-wall picks that I wouldn't normally find myself reading. However, they fit certain prompts that went with the readathon. So for example, the next book is one that I wouldn't typically find myself picking up this book, but I'm actually really glad I did because I very much enjoyed it. And that book is Clowns vs. Spiders by Jeff Strand. This book is so wild, it is so wacky, it is so off the wall bonkers. This is pretty much an apocalyptic sort of story where the entire world is being overrun by giant man-eating spiders. I do not like spiders. I am very terrified of spiders. This is a book that I would recommend if you want something that is going to be very, very, very entertaining. This is a story that does not take itself too seriously. It is genuinely unhinged, and I had a lot of fun with it. There are really scary moments, especially if you are also very scared of spiders. I don't know what to say about this book. It's funny, it's unhinged, it's wild. It's not a serious book, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm here to talk about is 5 Little Pigs by Agatha Christie. I have been on a sort of binge of reading Agatha Christie's backlist this year. I think at this point I have read maybe 11 or 12 Agatha Christie books since the summer, and I don't see that stopping any point in the near future. I'm having a lot of fun going through and reading Agatha Christie's backlist. There have been a couple of really standout, amazing Agatha Christie books I have read so far, and there have been a couple of duds at the same time. So not everything has been successful for me. And this book, 5 Little Pigs, is a very weird one for me to talk about because I was really finding myself enjoying this book. I loved the mystery in this book. The ending absolutely shocked me. I have been able to guess a couple of the endings of Agatha Christie's books, and I'm always very proud of myself when I can guess who done it or what's coming. So the fact that I was not able to guess the ending of this one really impressed me. This book is also a little bit different for Agatha Christie because instead of picking up right after a murder has gone down, we are following our lovable detective Hercule Poirot as he is actually investigating a 16-year-old cold case. I will say that this is definitely one of the better crafted Agatha Christie novels that I have read yet. All of that being said, I did not actually feel comfortable putting a rating on this book. For the majority of my time reading it, I thought that this was going to be a 5-star. I thought I was going to come on to this October wrap-up and find myself raving to you guys about an Agatha Christie book that I loved. It's not that I didn't love this book, okay? But some of the actual content in this book I found so extremely gross and problematic that I felt very uncomfortable giving this book an actual star rating because I feel like I go into a rant on Agatha Christie in every single wrap-up video I've done for the last consecutive 5 wrap-up videos. I truly do not have the energy to go into another rant on an Agatha Christie book, so I'm gonna do 2 things here. I'm going to say that 5 Little Pigs is an excellent read. If you want a well-crafted mystery with a shocking ending, I would recommend you read 5 Little Pigs. The second thing I'm going to do is link in the description my Goodreads review for this book, in which I will tell you in detail why I was very uncomfortable with some of the content in this book. But other than that, I am going to move on to the next book to talk about in this video, and that is The Scourge Between Stars by Ness. Now, this is a book that I also read for the readathon, and that was because one of the prompts was to read a a new to you author or genre. And The Scourge Between Stars is a sci-fi book, and sci-fi is a genre that I really don't read a ton of. However, I would like to dip my toe into it and try out some sci-fi and see if it's for me. This book is set in space, and it is very similar to the Alien film franchise, where there is an alien outbreak on this ship in outer space. I really enjoyed parts of this book. I do genuinely enjoy reading or watching anything that is set in space. But for this book, I found there to be so much going on, and I really felt like this book was just a little bit too wordy, a little bit too nitty-gritty with some of the tech stuff, and maybe that's an aspect of sci-fi that I just need to get used to. I could also see this book working a lot better in movie form, because you would get the visuals of the characters doing some of these things with the tech, with the grabbing of the guns and the punching in the codes, without having to get all of the wordy explanations for it, if that makes sense. Also, I listened to this on audio, and there were some aspects of this audiobook that was very weird to me. There were some parts of the book where the characters would be talking on a phone, and the audio narrator would be mimicking these phone static sounds and making these sound effects with their mouth, where the phone would be cutting out. So they would go, and it was really cringy, okay? I almost want you guys to go and listen to the audiobook of this and come back and tell me what you thought, because, oh, it was a little bit embarrassing, okay? Listening to the audio narrator making these static phone cutting out sounds. So I don't know. This book was a 3-star for me. I did not hate it, but it didn't convince me to dive headfirst into sci-fi. I'm not convinced yet. I need to try a little bit more, maybe try out some other authors, but yeah. If you like sci-fi, you may really enjoy that one. If you love the Alien franchise, I think you will love this book. The next best book I read in October is The Remaking by Chapman. This is the 3rd book now that I have read from this author, and I can firmly say that I do not think that this author is capable of writing a bad book. All right, this is going to be a hot take, but I feel like Chapman is the better version of Grady Hendrix. I feel like these two authors have very, very similar writing styles and similar themes and narratives that they delve into, but I have never been let down by anything that Chapman has written yet, and Grady Hendrix has had a few flops for me. This author is so skilled at writing truly fascinating characters. I have felt that way about the other 2 books I've read from him as well, that he knows how to write characters that the reader genuinely cares about. And I say this as somebody who feels like they are not a character-driven reader. And similar to what I said about the September House, I say I'm not a character-driven reader, but I think I just don't find authors who write characters very well. The main character of this book, Amber, I loved following her character arc throughout the entire book, and we see her entire life unfold throughout the course of this book, and I thought that that was so fascinating, so interesting. I did rate this book 4 out of 5 stars because I do think that the ending was a little bit unmemorable. I say that because I read this book pretty recently, and I'm already having trouble recollecting how this book ended, but I do have very vivid memories of the beginning and middle portions of this book. The final best book I read in October is Too Scared to Sleep by Andrew Duplessis. I was shocked how much I really enjoyed this book, because this is actually a book of short stories. I don't think I have yet met a book of short stories that I have enjoyed, that I have finished. I have DNF'd quite a few anthologies, and I have come to the point where I just feel like short story books are just not for me. But this is a book of short stories that I really liked. The stories in this book are so insanely dark, gory, shocking, I also believe that this book is marketed as young adult. If this book is young adult, I am mind blown because there is stuff in here that is very, very dark for YA. If you guys like horror, if you don't mind gore, I want you to read Too Scared to Sleep. I want to get your opinion on this book because I have not seen anyone reviewing this or talking about this book. I also feel like this was very reminiscent of Alan Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, but on a much more mature level. There are also aspects of this book that are told in verse. Some of the stories end with a very quick section of poetry at the end, and I really enjoyed those sections. Also, that cover is really cool, really creepy. I did rate this a 4 out of 5 star, only because, like I said, I do struggle with short story collections, and that is because it is difficult for me to start over so many times. But I do think that this is a book that I could see myself buying for my shelf one day in the future and rereading. Maybe rereading this for next October and Halloween, because I think this is a really fantastic pick for the spooky season. Now, while this is the end of my wrap up, I did actually read an additional 5 books in October. If you want to hear more about those 5 books that I read, check out this video next. Especially because the first book that I talk about in this video is one of my favorite books that I've read all year of 2023, and I need you to check out this book.